And yeah, we would love to record this meeting for further documentation. So Vcil Community is a community that have various individuals across Vietnam and a few countries that we work towards regeneration, well-being, and reimagine the way we live and develop. So our approach is mainly through alternative education, social innovation, and community building. So the event today is called Nếp Mới. In Vietnamese, it means new lifestyle, new way of living, which we actually organize on a monthly basis for our community member only. So today is the special edition because we really want to introduce the concept of localization more accessibly to the wider audience across Vietnam and other locations. So we've received the most registration ever, so I'm a bit nervous. um, yeah, so for Nếp Mới, we often listen to the needs of learning of our members to hear what people are interested in learning and developing. Then we would find the experts or practitioners or people who are passionate about different aspects or discipline in life. Then they can come and share their wisdom and life experiences for us all to learn and grow. Yeah, so today we warmly have the presence of Helena Norberg Hodge. So Helena is the founder of Local Futures, an international nonprofit organization that works to protect the environment and also advocate for well-being, to shift away from the global economy towards something local and rooted communities. And she's also the pioneer in creating the new economy
phản
movement.
biện
Actually,
vấn đề toàn cầu
Helena
hóa.
loves to screen your well-known documentary, The Economics of Happiness. And we also like to read the books. My favorite one is Ancient Future. So Helena is someone that we look up to a lot, and Ladakh, the community in India, has been the place that we feel very inspired to put together into a program or a learning experience, which is part of Vcil Travel School. Yeah, so again, I would like to welcome you to this space. Without further introductions, I would like to ask you the very first question. How are you feeling about this localization month?
I'm feeling very happy that clearly around the world, people are recognizing the need to rebuild their connections with other people and with the plants, with the animals, with the living world that is our home. This is how we evolved, who we are. And when we're completely removed from nature and from community, living in a city, in a very competitive and speedy environment, we suffer. And so all over the world, people are waking up to the fact that they want to come back to something that is more both human pace, in other words, slower, and human scale. They want to feel that they belong to a group. And this is really what the localization movement is about. It's about helping us understand how and why these relationships are being cut off, and that we all need to work together to bring back what it is really to be human. And that means what it is to be happier and healthier.
Thank you. That actually links to my next question, because recently a theme that has been really lively in our community is related to what does it mean to be human in this globalized and technological world? How would you like to go about that question?
Well, I would like to say what I say in my book, Ancient Futures, which is I came to understand that what we call culture, so whether it's Vietnamese culture or even the culture that might be different in the north of Vietnam or in the south of Vietnam or different regions, these cultural differences, they all arose because human beings were enacting and living in a localized way where they were relating to their river, to their trees, to their climate. And these different cultures arose around the world, even different racial differences, because we were adapted to nature. So that is how culture arose. And we need to understand that what we today call a consumer culture, we shouldn't really call a culture because it did not arise out of a group of humans deeply embedded in a place and developing different characteristics, different traditions. It arose because global traders and big businesses started shaping the politics, the economics, and the cultures around the world, all the time imposing essentially a global consumer monoculture. Now, that does not make us human. It makes us go against what I think we have to recognize. Every child, every child that's born longs to feel a sense of belonging. They need to be loved. They need to be held. And they need to feel as they're growing up that they have the respect and the ear and the love of other people. Horribly, tragically, the consumer culture has perverted that need for love and belonging into a need to consume. So the little 3 and 4 year olds around the world are told if you want to have friends and if you want your friends to admire you, you need to have the iPad, you need to look a certain way, you need to have the right running shoes, you need to be drinking the Coca-Cola. So that message is perverting a universal human need for love into a universal need to consume. And we really need to wake up to this and collaborate together to move away from it because we now can see in every country that it leads to not only depression and addiction, but even suicide among young people. A very clear statistic going up around the world. So it's a very urgent, very important issue.
Yeah. Um, so we can travel a little bit back in time, because I've never met you in person, and I've tried to listen to some of your podcasts and old videos. And I knew that you spent quite like a lifetime in Vietnam. I wonder in what moment of your life that you felt the need to really work on localization, and what really drives you until now.
As I guess most people may know, that everything I have to say comes not from me, but from experiencing a culture that until as late as 1975 had not been shaped by Western influences, neither missionaries nor colonial empires. None of that had changed the Ladakhi's culture. And this was for probably two main reasons. They are up at 12,000 feet, 3,500 meters high, surrounded by the Himalayan mountains and snowed in for 8 months of the year. And Tibetan Buddhism actually helped to protect the indigenous worldview and the indigenous self respect for a worldview that reminded people that we're part of a web of relationships. We are part of this living world. This is something that all traditional people knew. You know, just think about it. When we're living off the land and we're living, you know, basing all our food, our clothing, our shelter on the land around us, the water around us, the animals around us, we know that we are dependent on nature. It's when we're pushed into the city and we become dependent on economic forces that we don't even see, we don't know their names of the people. That's when we lose sight of this dependence on nature. And in the city, we become more competitive with one another. So in Ladakh, I actually got to experience a culture that had not been affected by this Western system. So they were living on the land, off the land, interdependent with each other. And I had come out as part of a film team. I was living in Paris, and I had already learned to speak 6 languages, and I had traveled quite a lot. Um, and I had seen traditional cultures and, you know, lived in America. I grew up in Sweden, and I had studied in Germany. So I had seen quite a lot of the world. And I thought that I'd be going to spend 6 weeks to help make a film. But then when I arrived, I virtually overnight fell in love with the people. And so when the filming was finished, I decided to stay, and I was going to do a PhD on the language. And I ended up working with Noam Chomsky at MIT, who's a famous linguist. But really, almost from the very first day, I became aware that the Western system that was coming in was destroying the Ladakhis' way of life, but also their self-respect. It was making people feel that they were stupid and backward because they weren't as good as these Westerners. They were getting such a wrong impression of the West. They didn't realize that in the West, we work much harder than they did, much harder. Many more hours a day, many more hours a year. They had no idea. It looked like we don't need to work, we just
Nhưng mà họ nhận ra, nhưng mà họ nhận ra là người Ladakh á, không phải làm việc như vậy. Người Ladakh dành rất nhiều thời gian để tận hưởng cuộc sống.
as well as for all of us, that we needed to protect our local economies.
Do đó tôi nhận ra là không chỉ ở Ladakh mà trên toàn thế giới chúng ta phải bảo vệ cái nền kinh tế địa phương của chúng ta, và và chúng ta phải một cách có chủ đích là phải từ chối cái nền văn hóa tiêu thụ của phương Tây.
I've always been a proponent of international collaboration, as we're doing now. It's very important that we know more about what's happening elsewhere, because the global media actually keeps us trapped in a national perspective.
Và cái việc mà hợp tác quốc tế như thế này nó rất là quan trọng.
What's going on the ground in most countries. So I very, very early on became aware that we needed to decentralize away from the global economy, and I started speaking about that in Ladakh and around the world.
So would you be able to maybe put in simple terms for those who are very new and fresh to localization? But being aware that most people who come here have very resonant concerns and interests in this movement. So how would you define localization fundamentally?
Fundamentally, I would define it as supporting a process of change towards rebuilding more of the human connections, community connections, especially intergenerational, because that's another part that the consumer culture has destroyed. It's the connection between old and young. But it's about rebuilding that sense of not just connection, but interdependence, starting to support each other. And that means very practically support each other so that we don't have to all on our own raise a child in a nuclear family, which is so unhealthy. Never happened in our evolution. Every mother had many more caretakers for every child. And this now what happens in the nuclear family makes women feel guilty. It makes them feel they're not doing a good enough job. And the whole process of mothering is not respected in the dominant consumer culture. So there's just so many ways that rebuilding our interdependence with one another is of fundamental importance for our happiness, but also connected to that for our physical health and even for our economic health. So the process of shortening distances is fundamental in this. So when we depend on products from far away, when we depend on structures and people that we've never seen, we don't even know how to be kind, compassionate, considerate. If we have any kind of spiritual values, we should be supporting localization as a way of living where we can be compassionate, where we can be kind, where we can be generous. And when we're not, everybody knows about it, because in those smaller scale structures, people will see if someone is only concerned about earning money, or if someone is only concerned about themselves and not about the group. So globalization has been a process where all of us have become dependent on these faraway economic structures. And when we buy food in the supermarket, we don't know if the farmers have been treated like slaves. We don't know if they've had to use lots of poisonous chemicals so that they're now getting Parkinson's and cancer and Alzheimer's. We don't know all that because we're in a system where we can't even begin to be kind or considerate or conscious. So the global system is one that was started through force. It started with slavery. It started by pushing people off the land in Europe. It was called enclosures. Enclosures meant that the elite brought in new laws which started taking the land away from local rural communities. And so people were pushed off their land and villages into big cities. And in the cities, they were dependent on the elites who were trading globally. And they had established slave-like conditions on the other side of the world where people were producing cotton or tea or bananas or whatever it might be for Europe. So this system started in Europe. It started with white men, and it was very much about separating us from one another and from the land. I think we need to understand this from a big picture, this history, to see why all around the world people are going to benefit by doing the opposite. Instead of being dependent on global banks and corporations, let's start supporting, maybe to start with our national bank or a national business or a regional one. Local doesn't mean that now we're suddenly just going to be doing everything in the village. It does mean that when it comes to childcare and food production, we want to get very local. We want to have food provided in the areas where people live so that they can have fresh, healthy food that's not been transported around the world, treated with coloring, chemicals, genetically modified so it looks good, instead of being a variety of food that's suited to your climate or to your environment. So the process of globalization was basically a process of separation, pulling us away from the land into cities where we were no longer dependent on one another. We were dependent on jobs, money, power from above. And suddenly other people became competitors. And it also cut off the relationship between old and young, because in the city we were crowded together. And when we live in the countryside, we have more space, we have more time, and the old and the young were connected. So localizing is the exact opposite. We want to try to support establishing a relationship with one another and with the land. So even if we live in the city, we can start to take steps. We can actually help farmers in the region by establishing a farmer's market or a new co-op or a shop that wants to source local food. And we can support this not only by our shopping habits, we can maybe make a donation to an initiative that's trying to set up a new market or trying to work with farmers. We can support also groups where the old and the young are coming together. So even in the city, there are now, in Europe anyway, projects like co-housing, where people realize that if they buy, even if it's an apartment block, but the people there want to support each other, they want to know each other, they want to help each other with the children, and they want old people to have a place there and to feel happy and welcome there. So there are all kinds of initiatives where even in the city, you can start rebuilding your relationship with other people and with nature.
Yeah. What you share really brings me to our very fast changes in Vietnam right now. In the recent year, we have speeded up like urbanization and building new infrastructure and improving our administration system. Well, I acknowledge and feel grateful for the convenience in terms of make our life easier. It has created, yeah, like issues and crises and disconnection. But named like social innovation and sustainable development. So how to say, like, what do you think, like, how can we communicate with others that localization matters in your approach? Perhaps you can share from what local futures do in spreading this movement.
Sorry, before you continue, I would like to ask you for slowly a little bit, because we also have the one person translating from English to Vietnamese. So you can slowly a little bit so that we can translate and not miss anything. Thank you.
Speak more slowly.
Yes, voice translating.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, so now I forgot the question. Oh yeah, what we can do. Well, really the action is, the most important action is a type of education. So I'm very glad that Vcil is interested in education, but I think more than anything, we want to educate adults. So from about 18 years to 100 years old, we want people to have the big picture, to understand how it is that we have so many problems now. Why all this pollution? Why depression? Why so many people unhappy? And why so much illness, both mental and physical illness? So once we understand that and understand the system that is to do with what we have to understand is a techno-economic system. In other words, I mentioned earlier that this started with European men supporting global trade and global traders using slaves. So even in Europe, when they brought cotton from India, the people had been pushed off the land to now work in bigger and bigger mills to produce cloth in a factory way, and the industrial factory owners treated the workers like slaves. They were treated extremely badly, and well, we could go on about that for a long time. I think this is important because today this system that is a global system is truly global. So elites from every country have been supporting it. And unfortunately, most governments are supporting it. Even in my native country of Sweden, the government, left-leaning government, right-leaning government, both of them have been supporting the handover of more power, more money to global banks and corporations. And tragically, this means that everywhere we have a situation where the 99% of people are suffering from this system. But our government leaders are not being forced to step back and understand why specific policies like increasing trade, increasing more and more energy consumption, how that is actually leading to greater poverty at home. They are not aware that what is called growth, economic growth, is making some billionaires richer and richer, while the majority of people are getting poorer. So the majority of people, including middle-class people in the West, are having to work harder and harder just to have a house and to put food on the table, and maybe schooling, healthcare. These basic needs are becoming more and more expensive, but the statistics that we are being shown do not tell us the truth. We have to look at not how much we earn, but how many hours a day, how many hours a week we have to work to provide for a house and for food and basic needs. We're now every year working longer and harder. And it's up now to us, to the people, and especially people who have the privilege to try to do something about the crisis we face. We all need to spell out clearly what's happening and clearly support the opposite direction, a path of reconnection between people and between people and nature. That reconnection is even better communication internationally. We actually need civic society peace movement, because our government leaders are locked into a competitive, very technological worldview. They are now trying to invest more and more in AI as a war machine, AI as a way also manipulating us in the social media. Just like the algorithms, we have now know that they know that if we are hateful, polarized, more money goes to the top, more clicks, more money to the top. So they are favoring violent conflict. And I hope people have seen the film, The Social Dilemma, which talks about how algorithms are like these metal soldiers to extract wealth for tech billionaires. AI is a technology that builds on algorithms. So it's important that we reject AI in the hands of this system. AI maybe could be beneficial for something, but it absolutely won't until we get democratic involvement in determining how AI will be used and who has the right to control it. It's a very, as we know, very powerful tool that should not be in the hands of a few tech billionaires. So I'm probably going off the tangent now, but education, the big picture, is the most important action. And this is why we have tried to do everything from books, films, articles. We have workshops, conferences, international tours, also exchange tours, to support people learning practically on the ground about the realities, what's going on.
Thanks for the film recommendation. Maybe we'll find that social dilemma one and run some screening events. Yeah, so you spoke already on the, I would say, the downside of the economic growth. Maybe can you add a bit more? How is the economics of happiness different from the current measurement of our economic growth indicators?
Yes, very good question. So first of all, again, to understand that, we have to recognize that our governments around the world are calculating progress according to GDP or GNP, sometimes gross domestic product or gross national product. And when you look at this honestly, this number goes up every time money is exchanged. So it's essentially a measure of commercialization. Commercialization. Now, this means that when friendships break down, when the intergenerational community breaks down, and we as family or friends or neighbors do things to help one another, this goes against the interest of the modern national government and GDP. So if you decide to grow a garden and you stay healthy and grow your own organic food, GDP would suffer. Whereas if you get ill and you have to have chemotherapy over a long period, GDP goes up. If there's more theft, so you all have to buy new cars or new television sets, the GDP goes up. And even worse, if a city is bombed to just flattened out, then rebuilding that city is very good for GDP. So it's crazy that we still are allowing this measure to be used. It's something environmentalists have talked about, but we have huge pressures now towards commercialization, towards a corporate worldview. But in the meanwhile, I am so privileged to have been in touch with people around the world who have questioned this. And particularly, I'm in touch with community groups around the world, very grassroots, small groups, very often led by women. And there people are going, completely in the opposite direction, and they are doing things more in the community spirit. They are doing things to support each other. And by shortening the distances, particularly around food, they have accomplished wonderful, wonderful success stories where they have projects that sometimes will also heal people who come from the city who might have drug addiction or depression. And when they get involved in a small local farm and learn how to be productive in that way, they can be healed in a very short time. Also, these projects are showing that they can take land that was destroyed by modern chemical industrial agriculture. The big machines, all the chemicals destroy the land, they kill the land. But when people start local projects, they come together in community and care for the land, heal the land, start composting it, start growing things on it. And particularly when they have highly diversified farm, especially also including animals, because the animal fertilizer is one of the best things for the land, for fertilizer. That's why we ideally need mixed farming. And at least, so the economics of happiness is the economics of both human and ecological health and happiness. It's really the well-being of all of life. It's all interconnected. And we all know that. We all talk about that. But unfortunately, even though our governments and the United Nations also talk about it, their economic policies are taking us in exactly the opposite direction. So it's the worldwide citizens movements, it's the community initiatives that are so inspiring and that are demonstrating the benefits. I'd also like to say that in America, you would be amazed at how many good projects like this there are. And in America, in some states, they've even managed to influence policy. So, for instance, they have now in some states the situation where when people who are poor are on food stamps, they're given free food from the government and they get a type of, you could say, currency. And they are told if they buy at the farmer's market, they will get double the value, twice as much that they will if they go to the supermarket. So this is a wonderful way of helping farmers, the land, and poor people. And this is now involving a little bit of policy change. So far at the national level, I can't tell you about any really positive policy change, but at the local level, people power have managed to influence some of the policies.
That's very wonderful news. I think we just heard recently that in Korea, there's also new policy that give incentives to support the underprivileged people. So there's an argument or like some misconception that localization sounds like going backwards or promoting isolation. How would you say? What would you say responding to this?
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a very common one, and it's being put up by big business. And there are these think tanks in big business that really see localization as such a threat because, as a global business, if people are eating food from their local area, they are not going to be making money. If those come from local farmers and local shops, big global business won't make money. So it means we have people who are not we might think they would be evil to destroy the local economy. They're not. They're trained into thinking about, I'm working for this business, we've got to earn more money, and this is the competitor. So there is a mindset that is so removed from the real world that you can work on destroying small businesses just because that's obviously what you have to do when you're working in a big company that needs to keep making money to employ, to keep all their employees on. So I want you to understand that this is not so much about bad people and good people. This is about a very bad system that is bad for the vast majority of people. And I mean really the majority. So even now in the upper middle class or even upper classes, in many countries, people are also having to struggle to just keep their house. In some cases, that means maybe a castle. It means a very big house. But at the moment, the truth is that almost whoever, wherever you are, you're having to run faster and faster just to stay in place. So it's very important that we recognize that and that we don't play a game of a type of identity politics. So this is not about demonizing people in power, either in business or government, or maybe people who are richer. Let's really focus on how this system is making everybody poorer, except, maybe a few thousand billionaires, if there even are 1,000. But we're talking about a very small number of winners in this crazy, crazy system. So let's think of it as crazy. Let's not think of it as evil. But part of what they do is to put out the message that local is right wing, that it's very selfish. They use the term protectionist as a nasty word, that people might want to protect their own local business is seen as something very right-wing, very selfish. They don't realize that if most people around the world were able to survive from local businesses, we wouldn't have the exploitation that we have, that the big businesses inevitably involve. So again, those same people who make it seem selfish and right-wing or isolationist to support the local economy, those same people are not able to even know how people on the other side of the world that work for them, that are cutting down their forests, to plant palm oil, they are not seeing this. I hope yeah. So they are not seeing the terrible impact on the environment or on people. If they have a big clothing corporation, when they send people out, maybe to Vietnam or to villages in China, to see how the workers are treated, very often the managers in those factories will tell people they're coming out. If you dare to say anything, you lose your job. So the information is incredibly poor, and that's what allows people who sit at the top of these corporations to really do things that are extremely destructive and employ people in ways that are inhuman, slave-like, while saying that a small local shop supporting its local community is a bad thing. Now, I think almost anyone who would listen to this would agree that having those closer relationships, being able to see what's happening on the land, are they using lots of chemicals? Are they using migrant type slave labor or not? All of this visibility and accountability is what makes localization the only way really that we can really behave in a way that our spiritual traditions everywhere encourage, that we treat other people the way we want to be treated, that we proceed with compassion and care. And of course, what we know in local communities is that when we help others, we can also count on people helping us. And so it becomes a win-win system. And I don't know how many of you will have experienced this in Vietnam now, but in Ladakh, I had the privilege of living in a culture, in an economy where this really worked. And I saw what happened when the global system came in. So this is not just my thinking, this is my observation, this is my experience. And I've even seen around the world that when you have smaller scale societies, even in Sweden, for instance, where I'm from, compared to America, where in Sweden we now have about 10 million people voting for one government. You know, in America, with those hundreds of millions, the distance between people and the government is so much bigger. And that is very definitely not a good thing. It doesn't guarantee that with smaller scale that everything is perfect. But what's very difficult for people to understand is that if you go to a small village in Vietnam now, or if I go to a small village in Sweden or in America, we are not seeing local. We are not seeing a local economy. We're not seeing what we're talking about. We are seeing people who have been left behind. The power is centralized in the big city, and even not in the big city because it's global. And so people are marginalized and left behind. So when you go to a small remote village, it can seem a very unhappy place because people there do not have power over their own life. They are not part of a localized economy. And this is why it's very, very important that we distinguish between the
Cái đó điều này rất là quan trọng, chúng ta cần phải phân biệt giữa cái gọi là bản địa trong truyền thống và bản địa mới.
they're not happy in the city and they're moving out consciously to live in small area, to have that community and to be circulated. And they're starting to build those local economies and to build that movement.
Có những người không cảm thấy mình hạnh phúc với cái lối sống thành thị, cho nên họ đi vào các vùng ven và thành cùng với nhau thành xây cộng đồng và sống có đời sống tự chủ để xây dựng có đời sống mới, nên hình thành một cái địa phương mới. Cho nên là cô muốn nhấn mạnh chúng ta cần phải phân biệt giữa một cái thứ là địa phương truyền thống, địa phương có sẵn, và một cái địa phương mà của những cái người rời bỏ thành thị tạo ra một cái phong trào địa phương mới. Linh nói là chúng ta đang có khoảng 1-2 câu và câu nữa trước khi chúng ta mở cái không gian cho mọi người đặt câu hỏi. Và trong thời gian đó, nếu mà mọi người
sorry mọi người,
có câu hỏi
đoạn
nào
vừa rồi
thì
hơi
mọi
bị
người,
dài
cứ
nên là để em
ghi xuống ở trong cái khung
dịch
chat
lại ha.
thì
Thì cái việc mà một cái
đáp.
doanh nghiệp lớn, một cái tập đoàn lớn hành động một cái không có trách nhiệm như vậy, nó không thể diễn ra trong một cái thiết chế truyền thống, tại một cái nơi mà cái cuộc sống của chúng ta phụ thuộc vào
của địa phương hóa không ạ?
những người xung quanh, phụ thuộc vào tự nhiên.
That the local has some kind of absolute boundary. First of all, let's remember local in this regard is a relative term. It's the relative to being dependent on global power structures.
Cái từ địa phương hóa là một cái từ mang cái tính chất khái quát về câu chuyện là nó không phải là một cái từ, nó chỉ là một cái từ chuyển từ cái việc mà phụ thuộc vào quá trình toàn cầu hóa với các tập đoàn lớn sang câu chuyện và phụ thuộc vào những cái thứ gần mình hơn, ở địa phương mình hơn. Những cái gì mà chúng ta đang cố gắng làm ở local Vcil đó là thúc đẩy cái cuộc đối thoại để mà mọi người có một cái tiếng nói trong những cái thảo luận về chính trị, để mà mọi người có thể thảo luận và vote, bình chọn được, tức là mọi người tự chọn cái mức độ địa phương hóa mà mình muốn. Cái vấn đề là cái tới dân chủ và mình có quyền ra quyết định trong cái vấn đề dân chủ bao nhiêu, thúc đẩy bởi cái việc là chúng ta có cái nhận thức về vấn đề môi trường. Và khi mà chúng ta có ý thức đó thì chúng ta biết được chúng ta cần có thể lấy được từ tự nhiên bao nhiêu.
With smaller units and more people working on the land, on the sea, in the forest, all of nature's, all of nature, more people can make sure that we get more productivity.
Điều ngạc nhiên là gì thì các bạn, điều ngạc nhiên đó chính là khi mà càng nhiều người làm việc, càng kết nối với rừng, với biển, với lại một cái ngữ cảnh địa phương, thì chúng ta còn có hiệu suất làm việc nó cao hơn, hiệu quả của cái việc đó nó cao hơn ạ.
Also have been replaced by giant trawling nets that sweep off the sea's bottom so much that each net could have
Và cái vấn đề là những người ngư dân địa phương đang được thay thế bởi những cái tập đoàn khai thác cá khổng lồ, mà ở đó những cái mẻ cá có thể khai thác hàng chục tấn cá, làm cái cạn kiệt cái nguồn lực.
Whereas when people fish in smaller boats, they put back the fish that are small.
Nên mà
It's a completely different relationship.
trong khi cái mối quan hệ của những người ngư dân với những cái mạng lưới nhỏ của mình ra biển khơi đánh cá là một cái mối quan hệ rất là khác biệt giữa con người với tự nhiên. Điều tương tự diễn ra với cái mối quan hệ con người với rừng. Có những cái cây có thể dùng cho cái việc mà nấu nướng hay là làm đồ thủ công, hay là nhưng mà nếu mà những cái người mà ở trong cái ngữ cảnh đó, những người địa phương ở đó với cái cánh rừng đó ra quyết định chọn cái nào làm cái gì đó, thì nó sẽ khác với câu chuyện một người lạ đến và quyết định ở trong đó. Bởi vì họ làm việc với bằng cái sự quan tâm, cái sự dành cho tự nhiên, so với những cái người làm ở một cái mức độ rất là lớn, những cái tập đoàn lớn.
And you do monoculture on one, just palm oil or just potatoes, just rice, and you do diversity on the other one. Always, if you have diversity, you'll be able to have higher productivity. So we have now, on a crowded planet, this
Chúng ta đang có một
access
cái hành tinh đốt
to go towards the local. This requires the local.
và chúng ta nhất thiết cần phải đi theo cái hướng địa phương hóa, nơi mà mọi người địa phương và kiến thức bản địa được quyền có mặt, được quyền để mà làm chủ cái địa phương đó của mình.
What the corporations are doing. The corporations are producing food for profit. It's not to increase.
Nó sẽ khác với cái cách tiếp cận của các đoàn, và các tập đoàn sẽ tiếp cận vấn đề thực phẩm thông qua cái việc là họ tạo được lợi nhuận bao nhiêu trong đó. Cho nên là cái mức độ của địa phương hóa thì câu trả lời là rất là phụ thuộc vào từng nơi, từng địa phương, và cũng tùy vào cái tiến trình dân chủ chính trị của từng nơi khác nhau nữa.
The majority of people on this planet are going to suffer. And so we know that we need to raise awareness so at least the economy comes back to the level of the nation state. And so we're hoping that there'll be enough of a wake up that
Chúng ta hy vọng là có cái sự thức tỉnh của mọi người, làm thế nào mà ít nhất cái nền kinh tế chúng ta quay lại quy mô của một quốc gia.
To democratic process, because at the moment our governments are allowing corporations to have no rules at all and to not pay tax. in the meanwhile, everybody at the national level, at local level, inside the nation state, are paying more and more tax and have more and more heavy regulation. And these regulations are often very counterproductive, and they often come because the abuse of global corporations, but those global corporations have no rules and they are suing our governments if they try to protect the environment. So this difference between what the subsidies, taxes, and regulations do to support a healthy economy versus supporting the global, that's what we need to be looking at.
Over the years of working and in this campaigns and putting in a lot of efforts, what has been the most struggles for you? And also there are like very many conflicts with governments. How do you build connections with the government? If we try to promote the connection into
Yeah,
different.
I think it's very, very important to remember that this system has been allowed to grow because there's not clear understanding, not clear thinking, not adding up the dots. And so therefore, I think always proceeding with compassion
Chúng
and
ta cần phải tiếp
kindness.
cận với cái sự tử tế, cái lòng từ bi, trắc ẩn.
But there's a big difference.
Nhưng mà có sự khác biệt lớn.
Kind and compassionate and going along with ideas that are very destructive. So we have to be very clear and very strong, but not demonize. And from my point of view, I'm absolutely committed to peaceful approaches, both in terms of intellectual argumentation, but also in terms of any demonstrations or so on. Always peaceful, always proceeding with kindness. So I haven't had conflicts with governments myself. I have been part of demonstrations, but not violent demonstrations. And I think really the activism that's getting overlooked is the awareness raising. And that's what we need to be, starting by making more people aware. So I would say reaching out to anyone who belongs to a spiritual community, who's part of the peace movement, who's part of sustainability, climate, poverty, all of these issues that all relate back to the economy. But most of them have never looked at the big picture. But once we look at the big picture, we can keep focusing on our particular issue and keep focused on that, but link it to the need for economic change. And then we can all be creating a bigger voice to insist that government has to change.
Yeah, that's like an art of being in relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, balancing our kindness and recognizing that this is something not quite true, not quite right. Maybe my final question, and then we would open up for Q&A. You've already suggested a few ways that we can like do this in practice, like reaching out to people, or opening our own markets or supporting farmers. So my question is around practice and specific actions on personal and maybe family level and community level. Yeah, like what are ways and specific things that we can do now, knowing all of this.
Yeah, well, I would say to any individuals listening that I would love them to, first of all, think of finding another friend or two or a colleague so that you change the I to a we. And so then as a group, you're thinking, what can we do in this difficult situation where it's hard to earn money in the countryside and you feel disempowered? What can we do? And so we in Local Futures have materials, films, and ways of supporting people if they want to move from the thinking to action. But the first step is really to look at it as a group. And then as a group, try to support each other emotionally, psychologically, with deeper conversation. It's very, very important. And because as a group, we can heal from a lot of the depression and stress that we're feeling in modern life. And then we urge people to together to reconnect to nature. And so you can go out as a group to do a type of vision quest, which is something that indigenous people are leading. But you can do a DIY, a do-it-yourself vision quest. So you might go to an area that's as natural as possible, and you might bring the children and let them also remain in a more peaceful way in nature, not just playing competitive sports or something. You can combine it even with some fasting and some meditation, and sitting around the fire at night, telling stories, singing together. Singing together is something that was done traditionally around the world, and the modern economy shut it off. It made people feel, oh, I can't sing. Even I felt like that. And it's an unbelievable of the many consequences of this modern economy, making people feel they can't sing, the vast majority. And then we have a culture of just stars and spectators. It's not a happy culture. Whereas when we sing together, it's spiritually a profound experience. And people did that for thousands of years together. So you can also, well, there are many things that you can do to support each other. But then we also want you to go through a process of rethinking. We want you to realize that so much of what you've been taught in school is assumptions about progress, about what it is to be human, that are wrong. And so you need to examine and rethink a lot of ideas that will lead to you being willing to resist the ongoing pressures from an artificial consumer culture while renewing real culture, the culture of joy, the culture of care, the culture of real productivity, the culture of real collaboration, not this pseudo corporate language about collaboration, but the actual real collaboration, and also genuine sustainability. Not just the language, and genuine regeneration, not the regenerative agriculture that means huge monocultures for export. So the rethinking will lead to resistance and renewal. And then finally, we like to remind people to practice rejoice, rejoicing every day, because when we now look at the news or see what's happening globally, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and depressed. And yet, when we open our eyes to life, when we open our eyes to the magic of life, just even the magic in our own bodies, how every muscle is performing a miracle every day, how every cell in our own bodies is different and changing from moment to moment, how everything in life is a miracle and leads to incredible gratitude and joy if we tune into life. But I want to say it's not just about tuning into life, because we also have to be aware that this system, the artificial anti-life system, is still continuing. So we need to spend some of our time to resist that intellectually and practically as much as we can. But those are the main.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
You, Lynn, have you been part of Vcil for quite a while?
No, it's just 1 year. But yeah, I would say I'm a secret follower.
Oh, well, very nice to meet you. Thanks for doing such a good job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can't wait for our Untalent show coming up this Sunday evening. Something that I'm very excited about, and I've been encouraging our community friends to sign up and just be like, okay, bring whatever you have and celebrate and be creative. Okay, so now it's Q&A time, and we have, in terms of time awareness, we have until 9:10. Let's keep it 9:10 for now, and last 5 minutes.
Yeah, you mean another 20 minutes?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, let's keep it in 20 minutes. That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one question in the chat. Maybe I can read it out.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I can see the one, how should local economy
Yeah, that first one.
to combine both its strength? Well, this again, it depends so much what you're talking about. And I want to remind people that food is the only thing we produce that everybody needs every day. And that's why focusing on food is
Thực phẩm là cái thứ mà mình tiêu dùng hàng ngày.
in terms of producing goods. The other side of caring for children, for the elderly, for the sick, and so on is equally important. But when it comes to producing goods, food, so when you say, how should it be structured? Well, there are very many different ways of going about this. So if you're living in a city, trying, first of all, to, as part of a group, to find where there are farmers in the region that could be still producing on a relatively small scale and as organically as possible, if you can help to set up a market for them. And it could be a farmer's market, it could be a shop, it could be a co-op, it could be something called community support agriculture. Do look at our localization action guide, where there are different examples of various ways of doing it. Then, when you're looking at the cheap goods and local resilience, well, we have to remember that the goods that are coming in from the outside that now are cheap are not cheap. We have an economic system that lies to us because our governments are favoring global corporations over local, but they don't even know that because they're just following a formula for economic growth, which means that those who use more energy, more resources, transport further, use more plastic, more chemicals, and slave labor, they are allowed to deliver goods into local economies around the world at an artificially low price. So it's absolutely criminal what's happening if people understood what's going on. So the balancing of cheap goods with local goods is something, again, that once people understand what's happening, they will want to change it. But if they feel they can't afford to buy from the local farmers market and they're buying in the supermarket, it's not a question of demonizing people or pushing people as consumers to always do the right thing. We can't even do the right thing because the right thing is not there in many places. And so it's a question of being compassionate and working together to bring about as much change as we can. And of course, when it comes to electronic gadgets that are artificially cheap and the electronic waste that's killing people because it's so toxic, we want to reduce our dependence on these, and we want to be doing what's called repair cafes or swapping, learning how to repair while also raising awareness about government policy being criminally unfair. You know, our grandmothers had refrigerators, and there were cars, there were lots of industrial product that had the lifetime of 100 years or more. And now things are being produced to break down faster and faster. It's called built-in obsolescence. And I think almost any voting public would want government to prevent that from happening. So once you look at this bigger picture, there's every reason to believe that the majority of people would want to move away from this system. So are there conflicts or disagreements? And well, there are people who don't want to use the language of localization. Excuse me, even though what they promote is in effect localization. But some are preferring to use the language of bioregionalism. And we feel that it's being encouraged by big business because it sounds very intellectual and very green. And there are more and more people now who are very worried about their job, and they are becoming anti-green, and they also they would be happy to have their government support their local farmers, their local businesses. And I think that's true everywhere in the world. But unfortunately, part of the corporate think tanks, they put out the word that localization is right-wing or isolationist and selfish. And a lot of the activists also believe that. So I don't think when you say followers of the localization movement, no, not within that, but there are a lot of people who are doing things that are actually localization, but they call it regenerative agriculture, for instance, instead of being part of a local food economy or permaculture or diversified. There are people, like I say, who use the term bioregional. Other people use the language of transition or degrowth or the donut economy. And when you actually look at what they're doing, a lot of it ends up being localization. But my understanding of this is they haven't studied the global system. And that's why they're not so clear about the need to move in the opposite direction. They haven't studied the global system from global experience. It's when you see everywhere from Vietnam to Brazil to Sweden to America that the global is destroying local economies that it becomes very clear.
Yeah, we are also filming a documentary called Outgrow the System. I'm not sure. Yeah,
Outgrow? Oh,
yeah,
I
Outgrow
didn't
the
hear
System
about that.
basically introduces existing alternative economy models around the world, and that also has donut economy and etc. Sunday also, and yeah, whoever that is in Da Nang, come join us and watch the film together. So we have one hand raised. Feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
Hi, and thank you for your amazing sharing about localization. And I have a question that I'm also aware that being able to be localized also a privilege as well, because there's some region that cannot grow all year round because of the weather or any other factor. For example, in Northern Europe, they have a long winter, for example, in Sweden. So how it could work in the winter there, because it probably that most or many product here, from Spain or from Southern Europe country.
Yeah, very good question. No, in these colder climates, you'd actually be amazed how much they used to be able to save through the whole winter by having proper storage. And so many things like potatoes and beetroot and carrots and so on could be kept sometimes through the whole year. Also in Ladakh, they can be kept quite easily. But again, you need the localized system and the shorter transport and so on. There have also been in Minnesota, in America, local food restaurants where in the winter you would have root vegetables and meat or eggs and animal products, and also using a few greenhouses, not greenhouses like what you have for the global economy now. You have like southern Spain, greenhouses plastering the whole region, exporting things all over the world. But when you have greenhouses that are providing for the local market, they are very ecological. They can also have glass windows, and you'd be amazed at how much you can produce and also store locally, much, much more than you would imagine. And then, to the extent that there would be import and export, there's no reason why localization means that there be no trade. Trade is something that was part of economies going back many thousands of years, but generally, wisely, people didn't depend on something from thousands and thousands of miles away that was essential for their survival. So generally, trade tended to include things that were more luxury or things like coffee, tea, spices, herbal medicines that can easily be transported more slowly by ship, for instance. And if in the future, who knows how quickly we're going to move towards localization, there would be things transported more rapidly by air, whatever. In any sane economy where people care about health of people and planet, that item that's been flown from across the world is going to cost more than something that has been transported from 10 miles away or 50 miles away. So in a fair economy that's fair to the people of the world and that is concerned about sustainability, having strawberries in the winter in Northern Europe could be a luxury that people might want to enjoy now and then, but it would be considerably more expensive than having a local product.
Great. Mời Vinh ha. Vinh giơ tay trước.
Hi, I'm Vinh. So nice to meet you. So I have a question around like habitual change for education. Because so I wondering like during your years of education, like what rituals or what activities you use to start changing people habits?
Well, I think a lot of people are now saying that people don't learn from information. I don't agree with that. What I'm seeing is that people are getting information that's very narrow, very technical, and it's being, again, managed by corporate interests. The information that we're sharing about how governments are subsidizing corporations and punishing local businesses, etc., that's information that people would like to have and that would lead to them wanting to see change. So education doesn't have to be just experiential or through storytelling. It's very hard for us to experience what this global system is doing globally. And it's very hard for us for us to communicate it in any other way except through words and yes, some images. But beware of the propaganda that says people don't learn from information. Let's think about what kind of information. And let's also remember that a lot of the information that is shared is, like I said, far too narrow, far too technical, and it doesn't show the links between our choices and what they mean for our personal health, our well-being, mental health and physical well-being. So once we start presenting the bigger picture of the connections and how it affects all of us, I think people are interested in learning about it.
Okay, thank you.
Mời bạn Hoàng ha. Vừa nãy hình như có anh
đây mình.
dạ, mời.
Chào Lị với mọi người. Hi, Helena.
Hi.
Thanks for your knowledge and sharing. I have this question that like in the localization that you mentioned, is phones and laptops, and internet and stuff still exist, and can we still use it? That is the first question. Should I just
Okay,
your
so that.
person?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. Yes, and first of all, where we are today, we obviously need to use the internet and even the mobile phone to share this information. And so we have to distinguish between the idea that we're using these technologies and that we are saying that they are essential as part of a good life in the future. I find now that on almost every culture where people have become very dependent on the screen, that they're wanting to spend less time on the screen. They're actually wanting to have more time in nature. And so I think that in the future, once we start looking at the bigger picture, we're going to want to be less dependent on these technologies. We're going to want to be able to do work and be out in nature more connected face to face to other people. I mean, we know that really the evidence is in now that the harm from not having direct face-to-face connection with people is causing huge problems with addiction, depression, and even suicide, among young people. So we're going to want to move away from a dependence. And that's why we also don't want AI to be able to become a fundamental part of this process of separation. I don't know if you're seeing this in Vietnam, but here in Europe, it's so frustrating. If you try to talk to a big business or government agency on the phone, you're sitting for hours and you're talking to robots. You're not actually getting a human person, and you have music playing while you have to wait and wait and wait. And if you ever get a human being, they are now so locked into a standardized system, they can't even relate to your particular situation. So the more we become dependent on these techno systems, which is what the internet is too, the more we become dehumanized, the more difficult it becomes to have the unique circumstances have a voice. So I think for our everyday economic needs, for our everyday needs, we're going to want to use it less. But I think in terms of climate emergency, in terms of helping people during catastrophe or whatever, we also need speedy communication. And so I'm sure that some of that infrastructure will be there. But I think we will more and more want to be less dependent on it, and that we want to have more human scale, more direct interaction for most of our needs.
But is it gonna be just like a transition toward the future of not using all of them anymore, or just like, because I'm not sure, but I'm not good at this thing, but like, can localization can still produce tech devices like this? Because
Yeah, but see, it's not globalization that's producing tech devices. So we have to understand, people do often think that if we didn't have global mobile corporations, we wouldn't have the mobile phone or almost any industrial product. It's not true. We're talking here about big business having rules set by society, rules that limit their profit making, their power over government. You see, now they're suing governments, taking government to court if government does anything that threatens their profit. So we have a rule by a blind casino economy. It's so dangerous. This is why every day there is more war, there's more friction, there is more madness because of that. Having businesses belong to a country, so a business, so that's the fundamental part of local as well, is every business should belong to a place and adhere to the democratic rules for business. Then they might be engaged in technology and they might collaborate with other businesses on the other side of the world, but again, under the umbrella of democratic oversight to prioritize human and ecological well-being over profit. And so it's not necessary to allow a business to just move around and never pay tax and sue government in order to have technology. But probably the technologies we have, like the internet, the mobile phone, and AI, would not have been developed if businesses had been democratically accountable. It's also tragic, but it's linked to military intelligence and fear. And this escalation is about governments wanting to be on top in what they perceive as this life or death threat with China and Russia. So America, China, Russia racing, and that's pushing for this high-tech development. So this is something else that we need to be talking about. And particularly there needs to be a loud voice for America to hear that if they wanted to reach out to have detente with China and Russia, almost certainly those countries would agree for a moratorium to not continue in this escalation.
Yes, thank you so much for your answer. Can I have one more
Sure.
question? like I just wanna ask this question because like I've read some books like somewhat like supporting the idea of like violent approach, because like a lot of big changes happen not only through like peaceful way of approaching, but more like violent way, because like all elite, they control, they have power, and they control the government, and all of their material interests are in their hands, and we are just small individual trying to make some kind of difference. But if they are still in control, is this way of approaching like peaceful way gonna make any real change, or it just makes the unbearable become a little bit more bearable for them to just still in the elites and they just control all these things? I'm not sure. Is it clear? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think the key is to realize, first of all, that people's movements have come together to make very big change. Only small numbers of people starting in a situation that seemed impossible, with slavery in America, or, there are various examples, but it's also true today that we have a system that is marginalizing and harming literally 99%. 1% of the global population would be 80 million people. This is not a system now that is benefiting 80 million. This system now is being pushed and continuing because of, perhaps a few million, but nothing like 80 million. So it's crazy. You see, if we think that we aren't powerful. The system could never operate without our ignorance. And even, I would say, without the ignorance of our political leaders and the majority in the corporations. The majority are ignorant of how these connections fit. They believe that overpopulation is leading to this problem. They have to have bigger farms. They have to have more technology. People believe this. I know scientists personally who are working really hard to develop more genetic engineering to feed the world. And they have not been exposed to the truth about that. So the problem is the truth has got buried over many generations. And so to uncover it is also why a country like Vietnam is very important, because you still have more tradition, you still have more knowledge of something more land-based and interconnected than we do in Europe or North America. And this, yes, I say, why you're waking up and participating is so, so important. So I don't think, but you see, so partly we have to think about how to win over more people. And so even here with Extinction Rebellion, that didn't become exactly violent, but I don't know if you heard, they would lie in the road and block cars, to really get the news. They're blocking people who are trying to go to their job, to pay for their house, to pay for their child's education. And it just led to more people turning away from the movement. So we have to invite people to join. We have to invite also with song and music and the positive that we can gain. And anger towards a particular elite, the elite that you see. The elite you see in your country is not the problem. It's the elite that you don't see. That's the bigger problem. And that's why even working with the elites in our country, we can motivate people to say, wait a minute, this has got to stop. It's escalating rapidly because of technology. The escalation is very rapid in the wrong direction. I hope that makes sense. So we have one more question, and then do you want me to answer that one?
Wait,
Yeah.
can you do it briefly?
Sorry?
Can you do it shortly?
I'll
And
try. Yeah.
yeah.
When you say which is more important, I would say that fundamentally for humanity, the most important is the human connection. Every child that's born needs to have that care and love that we had in our history. We would never have evolved without it. So that is more fundamental. But right now, where we are, it may be easier to start the food connection. That, I would say, is the movement that is gaining momentum, and is also the most central economically speaking. Remember, if there is a crisis, the roads may be blocked and the supermarkets are empty in 3 days. And this is true all around the world. So restoring food where people live is for survival so important. And it's also such a joyful movement. It brings so many benefits instantaneously. It's a win-win-win strategy. So I would urge you to focus on that. And thank you all so much for joining. I'm so sorry I haven't been to Vietnam. I do hope to come sometime, and very, very happy about the collaboration. Thank you. Thanks again, Lynn, so much.
Thank you so much. Can we do a group photo before you leave?
Okay. I look so horrible, but we can. Yeah.
Hui, can you help with that? With the group photo? Cool. Okay, shall I count? All right. If possible, please turn on your camera. Yay, it's so lovely to see your faces. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Maybe next screen, yeah?
Yeah,
3,
yeah.
1. Cool. I just want to say a few words before we officially close. So, right now it's localization week, and in Vietnamese we call it tuần lễ kho báu địa phương mình, Treasures of Our Local. It's happening right now until Monday, with a lot of events in Da Nang, in the north of Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh City and Vũng Tàu. So if you, by any chance, live in those cities, it would be wonderful if you can join and host your own events in the place that you're living in. And also in August, we have Vcil Travels School to Ladakh. If you feel like you want to explore and live in the community that really inspired Helena, yeah, reach out to us and we're open for that. And yeah, thank you so much for your all participation. And Helena, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your joy and giving us a lot of hope and sending you wishes and good health in your journey. And I hope to see you in person. Goodbye. Muốn nói gì Thiên?
Thiên chưa
Mệt
khuyên
mỏi
Thiên
quá
gửi
à.
lời